My name's Jack Rivers, and for a long time, I believed I was living the dream. I'm 39, married to Laura for 13 years, and we've built a life around our two amazing kids, Liam and Ava. Liam's the kind of kid who's always on the soccer field, a natural at everything he tries, while Ava's laugh could brighten even the darkest day. We had the house in the suburbs, family dinners every evening, and a life I thought was unshakable. Turns out, I was wrong. It was an ordinary Tuesday night. Dinner had been Liam's favorite, tacos with all the fixings. The kids were upstairs, Ava humming while she played with her dolls, Liam buried in some online game. Laura called me into the living room, her voice unusually steady. I followed, curious but unaware that my life was about to change. "We need to talk," she said, not looking at me. She fiddled with the edge of her sweater, her hands too calm, too controlled. I could feel the tension in the air before she even spoke. "What's on your mind?" I asked, taking a seat across from her. She hesitated for only a moment before launching into a speech that felt rehearsed. She talked about feeling stuck, about how life had started to feel small. At first, I thought she was hinting at a midlife crisis, a new hobby, maybe even a career change. Then she said it. "I think we should see other people." The words hit me like a gut punch. "You mean, like an open marriage?" I asked, hoping I'd misunderstood. "Yes," she said, nodding as if it was the most logical solution. "I feel like I've been losing myself, Jack. I need to find out who I am again." I stared at her, trying to process the words. "So, you're saying you want to be with other people, romantically?" "It's not just about that," she said, her voice growing sharper. "It's about freedom, about being happy again." Freedom. Happiness. Words that sounded noble but felt like daggers in this context. All I could think was, what about us? What about our family? I didn't shout. I didn't even argue. I just sat there, my mind numb, while she spoke like this was some casual conversation. When she finished, she stood up and walked into the kitchen, busying herself with the dishes like nothing had happened. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, her words playing on a loop in my head. Laura, my wife, my partner, the mother of my children, was asking for freedom. But what about the prison she was leaving me in? The days after that conversation were a blur. Laura didn't bring it up again, acting as if everything was normal. She'd smile at the kids, laugh at their jokes, and carry on like she hadn't just planted a grenade in the middle of our marriage. I tried to match her calm, but my mind was racing. I needed to figure out what was really going on. She started going out more. A yoga class here, a book club there. Excuses that felt flimsy at best. I wanted to believe her, but something about the way she carried herself had changed. Laura had always been warm and open, but now she was guarded. Her phone, once casually left on the counter, was always with her, like it had suddenly become the most valuable thing in the house. One evening, as she sat on the couch scrolling, I asked, "What's been keeping you so busy lately?" She barely glanced up. "Just catching up with some friends." "Friends from book club?" I probed, trying to keep my tone light. She hesitated for a fraction of a second before replying, "Yeah, from book club." It wasn't much, but that pause was enough to make my stomach tighten. Something wasn't right, and I couldn't ignore it anymore. That weekend, she announced she was heading to a spa day with some of the women from yoga. Normally, I wouldn't have thought twice, but my gut told me this wasn't about relaxation. So, I waited until she left, grabbed my keys, and followed her. I felt ridiculous, like some paranoid fool in a bad movie. But when she turned into the parking lot of a boutique hotel instead of a spa, my heart sank. I parked across the street, keeping a low profile as I watched her step out of the car. She wasn't carrying a yoga mat or a gym bag. Instead, she walked with purpose toward the hotel entrance, her phone glued to her hand. Minutes later, a man joined her. He was tall, with a sharp suit and an easy confidence that made my blood boil. They exchanged a look, one that spoke volumes, before heading inside together. I sat there in the car, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. The betrayal felt like a physical weight pressing down on my chest. Part of me wanted to storm in there, demand answers, and blow the whole thing wide open. But another part of me, the part still clinging to hope, knew I needed to stay calm. I pulled out my phone and snapped a few photos. If Laura was going to destroy our marriage, I needed the truth in my corner. For now, I'd keep quiet and gather what I needed to confront her on my terms. That night, when she came home, she was all smiles. "How were the kids?" she asked, setting her bag down like nothing had happened. "They were great," I replied, keeping my voice even. "Did you have a good time?" She nodded, avoiding my eyes. "Yeah, it was really relaxing." I stared at her, wondering how she could lie so easily. The woman I thought I knew was slipping further away with every word. But I wasn't going to confront her yet. Not until I had every piece of the puzzle. For now, I'd play the part of the unsuspecting husband. But deep down, I knew the cracks in our marriage weren't just surface level anymore. They ran deep, and they were spreading fast. After that hotel incident, I couldn't unsee the signs. The late-night texts, the sudden trips to the store that took hours, the way Laura's attention always seemed elsewhere. She wasn't even trying to hide it anymore. Not really. And that made it worse. It was like she thought I wouldn't notice, or maybe she didn't care if I did. I started documenting everything. It felt sneaky and underhanded, but what choice did I have? Every spa day, every mysterious phone call, every time she laughed at her screen while I sat 2 feet away, pretending not to notice, it all went into a folder on my laptop. Photos, timestamps, even receipts she carelessly left lying around. I was building a case, though I wasn't sure yet what I planned to do with it. It didn't take long for a pattern to emerge. The name Jason kept popping up. He wasn't in her contacts. She was smarter than that. But his number showed up on our phone bill over and over, always during her so-called outings. One night, while she was asleep, I finally gave in to my suspicion. Her phone was charging on the nightstand, and I knew her passcode. It hadn't changed since the kids were born. My hands shook as I unlocked it, half hoping I was wrong. The messages hit me like a punch to the gut. "Jason. Can't wait to see you tomorrow. Same time. Laura. You bet. I'll make an excuse about yoga again, winky face. Jason. You're worth it. I'll bring that wine you love." My heart felt like it was tearing in two. I scrolled further, finding months' worth of messages. Jokes, compliments, plans. It wasn't just physical. They talked like they were building something together, something that had no place in my life or my kids' lives. I put the phone back, careful not to wake her, and sat in the living room for hours, staring at nothing. I felt trapped in my own house, a stranger in my own marriage. The weight of what I'd seen crushed me, but I couldn't let it show. Not yet. The next day, I called a lawyer. Her name was Vanessa Harper, and she came highly recommended by a friend who'd gone through a brutal divorce. Vanessa didn't sugarcoat anything, and I respected that. "If what you're telling me is true, Jack, you need to start protecting yourself and your kids immediately," she said. "Gather evidence. Texts, photos, financial records. The more you have, the better. But don't confront her yet. You need to play this smart." I nodded, even though she couldn't see me through the phone. "I've already started," I said, thinking of the folder on my laptop. "Good," Vanessa said. "Stay calm, and don't give her any reason to suspect you know. We'll build a case, and when the time comes, you'll be ready." That night, Laura kissed me on the cheek before bed like nothing was wrong. I stood there, numb, wondering how someone could betray their family so easily and still sleep soundly at night. But I didn't say a word. I just smiled back, as if I wasn't quietly preparing for the storm that was about to hit. It was getting harder to keep up the act. Every time Laura smiled at me or asked about my day, it felt like she was mocking me, daring me to call her out. But I kept my cool, knowing I had to be methodical. This wasn't just about me, it was about Liam and Ava. They didn't deserve to have their world turned upside down because of Laura's selfishness. She was growing bolder. Instead of yoga, she started claiming she was meeting up with old friends. Sometimes, she'd leave right after dinner and not come back until nearly midnight. The excuses piled up like kindling, and I was ready with a match. One Saturday, Laura asked if I could watch the kids because she had some errands to run. I agreed, keeping my face neutral. The moment she left, I loaded Liam and Ava into the car and dropped them off at my parents' house, telling them it was a spur-of-the-moment sleepover. My parents were thrilled to have them, and it gave me the freedom I needed. I followed Laura's car from a safe distance, my stomach churning with nerves. She drove across town to a small cafe, where she parked and went inside. A few minutes later, Jason arrived. I recognized him immediately from the photos I'd taken outside the hotel weeks earlier. He was tall, with that easy confidence that seemed to come naturally to guys who thought the rules didn't apply to them. They sat at a corner table, leaning in close and laughing like they didn't have a care in the world. Jason reached across the table and touched her hand, and she didn't pull away. The sight of it burned, but I stayed put, snapping pictures from my phone. When they got up to leave, I followed again. This time, they headed to a park, one of those quiet, picturesque places with a duck pond and winding paths. I stayed far back, but close enough to see them holding hands as they walked. My heart felt like it was being shredded, but I didn't let the emotion take over. Not yet. They stopped at a bench near the pond, and Jason leaned in, kissing her like he'd done it 100 times before. She kissed him back, her hands on his chest, completely lost in the moment. I snapped more photos, every click of the shutter feeling like a nail in the coffin of our marriage. By the time they parted ways, my resolve had hardened into steel. This wasn't just a fling. Laura wasn't finding herself, or exploring new connections. She was systematically tearing apart the life we'd built, and she didn't care who got hurt in the process. When I got home, I opened my laptop and added the new evidence to the folder. Texts, photos, timestamps, everything was there, a complete record of her betrayal. I even made backups on a flash drive and an external hard drive, just in case. Later that night, Laura returned, smiling like she'd spent the day doing something wholesome. "The errands took longer than I thought," she said casually, dropping her keys on the counter. "How were the kids?" "They had a great time with my parents," I replied, my voice steady. "Everything went smoothly." "Good," she said, heading upstairs to shower. I watched her go, my face blank, but inside, the anger was boiling over. I'd given her every chance to come clean, to be honest, to at least show some kind of remorse. But she hadn't. And now, it was too late. The Jack she thought she knew was gone. I wasn't going to sit back and let her destroy our family without consequences. It was time to make my move. The morning after my reconnaissance, I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the steaming mug of coffee in front of me. Laura had already left for work, a kiss on my cheek and a breezy "see you later," her only acknowledgement of our unraveling marriage. She didn't have a clue about the storm brewing in the background. I spent the day preparing. First, I called Vanessa, my lawyer, and walked her through the latest evidence. She listened quietly, her tone sharp when she finally spoke. "This is solid, Jack. With what you've collected, there's no way she can deny the affair. The financial implications alone, if she's been using joint funds to support this relationship, could give you a major edge in court. I need to protect my kids, Vanessa. I'm not just worried about the divorce. I'm worried about what happens afterward." "You're doing the right thing," she assured me. "I'll draft the paperwork and start setting up a strategy. Keep gathering evidence, but don't confront her yet. We'll control the narrative when the time comes." Next, I reached out to my friend Mark. He'd gone through a messy divorce a few years ago, and while I didn't tell him everything, I asked for advice. "Play it cool," he said. "People like Laura, they think they're invincible. Let her think she's in control until you're ready to pull the rug out." It was good advice, even if it felt like a bitter pill to swallow. Every second spent pretending I didn't know was torture, but I knew Mark and Vanessa were right. I had to stay patient. That evening, Laura was unusually cheerful. She made dinner, pasta and garlic bread, and laughed with the kids like everything was normal. I played along, but every laugh, every smile from her felt like a slap in the face. How could she compartmentalize like this? How could she betray me so completely and then act like the perfect wife and mother? After the kids went to bed, she curled up next to me on the couch, scrolling through her phone. I watched her out of the corner of my eye, the blue light of the screen casting shadows across her face. She looked peaceful, content, even happy. It was infuriating. "You've been working late a lot lately," I said casually, breaking the silence. She looked up, her expression unreadable. "Yeah, things have been crazy at the office." "Why do you ask?" "Just curious," I said, forcing a smile. "I hope you're not overdoing it." "I'm fine," she replied, her tone light. "Thanks for checking in though." If only she knew how deeply I'd been checking in. Later, while she showered, I went through her purse. Sure enough, there was a receipt from the cafe she and Jason had visited that day. She hadn't even bothered to hide it. I slipped it into my folder of evidence and returned everything to its place before she came back downstairs. As I lay in bed that night, I thought about how to approach the next steps. Laura didn't just betray me, she betrayed our family. Liam and Ava deserved better. They deserved stability, love, and a father who wouldn't let them be collateral damage in someone else's selfish choices. I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. I was fighting for them, and I was done waiting. The time to act was getting closer, and when it came, Laura wouldn't see it coming. The next few days felt like a game of chess. Every conversation, every shared meal, every casual glance across the room was calculated. Laura continued her charade, blissfully unaware that her secrets were unraveling faster than she could weave them. She wasn't the only one making plans. By midweek, Vanessa had a strategy mapped out. Jack, this isn't just about divorce. You need to control the narrative with the kids, the finances, and your reputation. We'll petition for full custody. Your evidence makes it clear she's been neglecting her responsibilities. I nodded, feeling a mix of relief and dread. What about the house? I don't want Liam and Ava uprooted. That's on our list, Vanessa assured me. We'll argue that maintaining their routine is in their best interest. But Jack, be prepared. Laura won't go down quietly. I knew she was right. Laura had always been strong-willed. This wasn't going to be clean or easy. But I wasn't backing down. On Thursday evening, Laura told me she had another errand to run. I nodded, keeping my face neutral, and watched her walk out the door. Once her car disappeared, I grabbed my keys and headed out. This time, I didn't follow her. I already knew where she was going. Instead, I drove to Jason's house. I tracked him down through public records and a little sleuthing, and now I was sitting in my car, staring at his well-manicured lawn and his shiny black car in the driveway. I wasn't sure what I was going to do. Part of me wanted to knock on the door and confront him, to look him in the eye and demand to know what made him think he could invade my life. But I didn't. Instead, I took a deep breath, snapped a few photos of his house for the file, and left. It wasn't Jason I needed to face. Not yet. When I got home, Laura was still out. I sat at the kitchen table, flipping through the evidence I'd collected. Every text, every photo, every receipt told the same story. Laura had chosen this man over her family. The weight of it pressed down on me, but it also fueled my resolve. By the time she returned, I was in bed, pretending to be asleep. She slipped in beside me, the faint scent of cologne that wasn't mine lingering in the air. My fists clenched under the covers, but I didn't move. Confronting her then would have been satisfying, but it wouldn't have been strategic. Not yet. The next day, I took a bold step. While she was out, I met with Liam's soccer coach and Ava's teacher. They'd always known me as the quiet, supportive dad who cheered from the sidelines and volunteered at school events. Now, I explained just enough for them to understand that changes might be coming. I want to keep things stable for the kids, I said. They've been through enough this year. Both of them offered their support, promising to look out for Liam and Ava. It wasn't much, but it was a start. That evening, as we sat down for dinner, I watched Laura closely. She laughed at one of Liam's jokes, her smile wide and genuine. To anyone else, it might have seemed like a picture-perfect family moment. But to me, it was a mask I was about to shatter. Liam, Ava, I said, my voice steady but firm. I've been thinking we should plan a special weekend together soon. Just the three of us. Maybe a camping trip. The kids lit up with excitement, their chatter filling the room. Laura's smile faltered for a split second, and I caught the brief flicker of unease in her eyes. She didn't say anything, but I knew she was wondering what I was up to. Good. Let her wonder. The pieces were falling into place, and soon, she'd know exactly what was coming. By Friday evening, the tension in the house was palpable. Laura acted as if nothing had changed, smiling over dinner and making plans for the weekend. But I could feel the undercurrent of unease. She'd caught on to my subtle shift, the way I didn't press her about her outings anymore, how I focused on the kids, or how I'd stopped asking about her day. She didn't ask questions, but her eyes lingered on me longer than usual, searching for cracks in the surface. I wasn't cracking. After dinner, she announced she had to run to the store. "We're out of milk," she said, grabbing her keys. I nodded, barely looking up from my phone. "Take your time." It was an excuse, of course. There was no way she'd leave just for milk. As soon as the door closed behind her, I sprang into action. I had 30, maybe 40 minutes tops. I went to her home office, where she kept a locked drawer in her desk. I'd noticed her going to it more frequently lately, always careful to keep it locked. Tonight, I'd planned ahead. Using a small set of lockpicks I'd borrowed from Mark, I carefully worked on the mechanism until it clicked open. Inside were papers, bank statements, receipts, and a journal. I took photos of everything, not bothering to read it all right away. The bank statements showed transfers I didn't recognize, withdrawals that didn't match our regular expenses. And the receipts? Hotel stays, expensive dinners, and gifts, all from places I hadn't set foot in. But it was the journal that stopped me cold. I skimmed through the pages, my stomach twisting with every word. There were entries about Jason, how she felt alive with him, how she couldn't imagine her life without him. She wrote about the thrill of their secret meetings, the plans they'd made to one day be together openly. The word divorce was scrawled in one entry, underlined twice. My hands trembled as I photographed the journal. If there had been any lingering doubt about her intentions, it was gone now. She wasn't just having an affair, she was planning her escape. I put everything back exactly as I'd found it and locked the drawer. My heart was racing, but my mind was calm. This was it. This was all the proof I needed. Laura had already made her decision. Now it was time for me to make mine. When she returned, holding a single gallon of milk, I was sitting on the couch with a beer, flipping through channels like nothing had happened. She glanced at me, hesitating for a moment. "Everything okay?" she asked, setting the milk on the counter. "Yeah," I said, not looking at her. "Everything's fine." She didn't push, but I could feel her watching me as she put the milk away and headed upstairs. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Tomorrow was the day. I'd made my plan, lined up my evidence, and prepared for the fallout. Laura had no idea what was coming, and I felt a strange mix of sadness and resolve. I'd loved her once, deeply, but the woman I'd married wasn't the same person anymore. And now, I had to protect myself and my kids from the damage she was leaving in her wake. Tomorrow, the facade would shatter. There was no going back. Saturday morning started like any other. The kids were bouncing around the kitchen, debating whether pancakes or waffles were better. Laura smiled at them from across the table, her hair pulled back in a loose ponytail. She looked relaxed, like a woman who believed she still had everything under control. Little did she know, her time was up. After breakfast, I told Liam and Ava to pack their bags for the camping trip I'd promised them. Laura raised an eyebrow at me, surprised. "You're really taking them today?" "Yeah," I said, keeping my tone casual. "I figured we could use some time together. Just me and the kids." She hesitated, then nodded. "That sounds nice. I'll have some time to catch up on things around the house." Or Jason, I thought, biting my tongue. Once the kids were upstairs, I looked at Laura and said, "Actually, I need to talk to you before we go. Can we sit down for a minute?" Her smile faltered, but she followed me to the living room. We sat across from each other, the coffee table like a battlefield between us. She looked at me, waiting for me to speak, her eyes narrowing slightly. She could feel the shift, sense that something wasn't right. I leaned forward, clasping my hands. "Laura, I know." She blinked, her expression guarded. "Know what?" "Don't do that," I said quietly. "Don't insult me by pretending you don't know what I'm talking about." Her lips parted as if to respond, but no words came out. I reached behind me and grabbed the folder I'd prepared, setting it on the table. Slowly, deliberately, I slid it toward her. "I've been watching, Laura. I know about Jason. I know about the hotel stays, the lies, the money you've been siphoning out of our accounts. I know about the plans you've been making behind my back." Her face went pale, her hands trembling as she opened the folder. She flipped through the pages, her expression shifting from shock to anger to something that looked like fear. When she finally looked up at me, Her voice was barely a whisper. You went through my things? Don't try to turn this around on me, I snapped. I trusted you, Laura. I gave you everything. And you threw it all away for some guy who doesn't give a damn about you or our kids. Tears welled up in her eyes, but I didn't let myself feel sorry for her. How long? I asked, my voice breaking slightly. How long have you been lying to me? She looked down at the folder, silent. Answer me, I demanded, slamming my hand on the table. About a year, she admitted, her voice shaking. It started as just texts. And then, I don't know, Jack. I didn't plan for it to get this far. I laughed bitterly. You didn't plan for it to get this far? You've been writing about leaving me, about starting a new life with him. That's not something that just happens, Laura. That's a choice. You chose this. Her tears spilled over, but I wasn't done. And what about the kids? Did you think about them at all? Or were they just collateral damage in your little fantasy? She tried to speak, but I held up a hand to stop her. No. You don't get to justify this. Not to me. Not to them. I'm taking Liam and Ava camping, and when we get back, you'd better figure out how you're going to explain this to them. Because they deserve the truth, and I'm done covering for you. With that, I stood and left the room, my heart pounding in my chest. Upstairs, Liam and Ava were packing their bags, blissfully unaware of the storm downstairs. I helped them get their things together, forcing myself to smile and stay calm. As we drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror. Laura stood in the doorway, her face a mixture of guilt and desperation. She had no idea how much worse things were about to get. This was just the beginning. The drive to the campsite was peaceful, filled with Liam and Ava's excited chatter about fishing, hiking, and the s'mores they planned to devour. I kept my focus on them, answering their questions and laughing at their jokes, but my mind was miles away. The confrontation with Laura replayed over and over, every word etched into my memory. Once we got to the campsite, I threw myself into setting everything up. The kids helped pitch the tent and gather firewood, their enthusiasm a welcome distraction. By the time the sun began to set, we were roasting marshmallows by the fire, the crackling flames casting a warm glow over their faces. Dad? Liam asked, his voice quiet. Yeah, buddy. Is Mom okay? She seemed different this morning. The question caught me off guard. Liam was sharper than I gave him credit for, and Ava's wide-eyed gaze told me she was listening too. I paused, choosing my words carefully. Mom's going through some things right now, I said slowly. But no matter what happens, I want you both to know that I love you more than anything. That's never going to change. Liam nodded, seeming to accept the answer, but Ava frowned. Are you and Mom mad at each other? I swallowed hard, forcing a smile. Sometimes grown-ups have disagreements, sweetheart. But it doesn't mean we don't love you or want what's best for you. She seemed satisfied with that, and the conversation shifted back to marshmallows. But their questions lingered in my mind long after they'd fallen asleep in the tent. The fallout from Laura's choices was already starting, and it was only going to get harder. When we got home the next afternoon, the house was eerily quiet. Laura was in the living room, sitting on the couch with a blank expression. Her eyes were red and puffy, like she'd been crying all night. She looked up as we entered, her gaze flicking between me and the kids. Did you have fun? She asked softly. Yeah, Ava chirped, running to show her a pine cone she'd found. Liam hung back, watching her cautiously. Laura smiled faintly at Ava's excitement, but her focus was on me. Once the kids were upstairs, she stood and crossed the room. Jack, can we talk? I folded my arms. We've already talked. She flinched but pressed on. I need to explain. No, I cut her off, my voice firm but low. What you need to do is figure out how you're going to tell the kids the truth. I'm not lying to them, Laura. I won't let them grow up thinking this is normal. Her expression crumpled, and she started to cry. I didn't mean for this to happen, she whispered. I've made mistakes, Jack. I know that. But please, don't take them away from me. I felt a surge of anger at her audacity. You made your choices, Laura. Now you have to live with the consequences. She opened her mouth to argue, but I turned and walked away, heading upstairs to check on the kids. Liam was reading, and Ava was arranging her pine cones on her dresser. Seeing them so peaceful, so innocent, made my resolve even stronger. Later that evening, I called Vanessa to update her. "She's starting to unravel," I said. "She's scared, but she's still trying to play the victim." "That's exactly what I expected," Vanessa replied. "Stay the course, Jack. We'll file the divorce papers this week. Have you thought about the custody arrangement you want?" "Full custody," I said without hesitation. "I'm not letting her instability affect the kids." "Good," Vanessa said. "I'll draft the documents. It's time to take the next step." That night, I slept in the guest room, as I had since the confrontation. The distance between Laura and me was more than physical now. It was a chasm neither of us could cross. I knew the coming weeks would be messy, but there was no turning back. The fallout had begun, and I was ready for whatever came next. The following week was a whirlwind. Vanessa worked quickly, filing the divorce papers and setting a formal custody request for Liam and Ava. Every day brought new challenges: conversations with the kids, logistical arrangements, and navigating the tense atmosphere at home. Laura alternated between pleading for forgiveness and lashing out in anger. I stayed calm, focused, and resolute. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about protecting my children and moving forward. The kids sensed the shift, even if they didn't fully understand it. Liam became quieter, his usual curiosity replaced by an unspoken worry. Ava clung to me more than usual, her innocent questions cutting deep. "Are you and Mom not going to sleep in the same room anymore?" she asked one night as I tucked her in. I took a deep breath, sitting on the edge of her bed. "Sweetheart, things are going to change a little," I said gently. "But no matter what, I'll always be here for you. Both of us will." "Okay," she said softly, though the uncertainty in her eyes lingered. After leaving her room, I found Liam sitting on the stairs, waiting for me. "Dad," he began, his voice hesitant. "Is this our fault?" My chest tightened. I knelt in front of him, gripping his shoulders. "Liam, listen to me. None of this is your fault. This is between your mom and me, and it has nothing to do with you or Ava. You're amazing kids, and we both love you so much. Do you understand?" He nodded, though his eyes were still clouded with doubt. I hugged him tightly, silently cursing Laura for putting us in this position. The next morning, I served Laura with the divorce papers. She read them at the kitchen table, her hands shaking. When she looked up at me, her face was a mixture of anger and desperation. "So that's it," she said, her voice breaking. "You're just done." "I didn't end this, Laura." "You did," I replied evenly. "I'm just making sure the kids and I can move forward." She opened her mouth to argue, but I walked away before she could start. Over the next few weeks, the pieces began to fall into place. Vanessa handled the legal side with precision, ensuring every detail was accounted for. The evidence of Laura's affair made my case strong, and her financial misconduct, using joint funds for her relationship with Jason, sealed the deal. Jason, predictably, disappeared as soon as the fallout began. Laura's calls to him went unanswered, and the once confident woman I'd married seemed lost and directionless. It was hard to watch, but I couldn't let myself feel pity. She'd made her bed. By the time the divorce was finalized, I had full custody of Liam and Ava, the house, and the support of family and friends who rallied around me. Laura was granted visitation, but her time with the kids was limited. I knew it wasn't easy for them to see their mom leave, but I also knew they were safer and happier in a stable environment. One evening, a month after the papers were signed, I sat with the kids on the couch, watching a movie. Ava had fallen asleep against my shoulder, and Liam was nodding off as the credits rolled. For the first time in months, I felt a sense of peace. The storm had passed, and we were still standing. I wasn't naive enough to think the road ahead would be easy. There would be hard days, questions from the kids, and moments of doubt. But as I looked at Liam and Ava, I knew one thing for sure. They were my purpose. They were my anchor. Laura's betrayal had shattered our family, but it hadn't broken us. We were building something new, something stronger. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like we were going to be okay.